this topic about ethics, so we'll see how they handle it, right? We'll throw it out there at them. So the first thing that we talked about is, I'm gonna give you a scenario, okay? So raise your hand if you've been to New York City. Very diverse place, right? Okay, you're in New York City, say Manhattan, right? And you're walking down the street, and you look to your right, and there's an alleyway, right? And you notice in this alleyway that there's $500 laying on the ground, just haphazardly on the ground, right? What do you do? Some people are telling me with their eyes, they're like, I pick it up, right? I want to know, what do you guys do? Who keeps walking? Do me a favor, raise your hand if you keep walking. Okay, so give me some reasons why you would keep walking. What do you think? Anyone over here? Yep. Yeah, because it's in New York City. Right, so if it was in Presque Isle, it'd be a different response? Okay, she's like, yeah. All right. When you keep, what's the justification for that? So you keep walking simply because it's New York.
You don't know if somebody in there.
Right. It's got to be a trap.
Yeah.
Right. We said in your class, Austin Kushner's going to jump out. Right. Okay. Who else does that? Who else keeps moving? Anyone else? Who picks up the money? That's what I want to know. Ray, you're a pastor. Pastors pay bills too. Someone else, you have your hand up? So you would actually stop, the man right here in the black hat, you would actually pick up the money?
Well, yes. If there was a police officer close by, some safe way to turn over the money.
Right. Okay.
To authorities. I would not walk off with it.
Sure. So you would take it and give it to some other authority to do something with it.
Yes.
Right, with no reward in mind. Right? Okay, all right. Anyone else would pick up the money? You would? You send your wife to pick it up? Just in case there's any bad karma, she can get it. Okay, I'll tell you why this is important again in a second. Let me go to the next one, because that one was kind of easy. That's a little bit easy. You see a man, we'll do this one too, see how they handle this one. You're walking, okay, you're on a bus trip. Let's say you're going to Las Vegas, right? And you're on the bus with friends and you're having a good time and you stop in an area that's kind of chilly and you get out and you're a little bit cold and you look across, people are going to the convenience store and you see someone in the convenience store working, right? That person leaves the counter and goes back into the bathroom, right? As that happens, you see another man standing with an infant, right? The man notices that the guy behind the counter went to the bathroom. He puts the infant on the ground. He runs into the store and grabs a loaf of bread, brings the loaf of bread back out, right? Picks up the baby and continues to do what he was doing. You're just kind of sitting there, maybe you're smoking a cigarette, maybe you're drinking a soda, but you're just watching this. Okay, so let's take our ethical meta-narrative, right, that Ray talked about earlier in class. What do you do? What's that? Go pray. How many people do that? How many people say, I'm just going to go buy the guy some bread? Okay, all right.
I give him $5.
Give him, right? Give him $5, right? Anyone do anything else? Does anyone tell on the guy? Why? Is that unethical?
Dangerous.
It's dangerous? Okay. Would you say, Ray? You don't know? Okay. I want to talk about the ways that you guys respond to these things and tie it into ethics and race, show you some things that I think are really interesting. First of all, we have to define what ethics is. Every textbook I look at says ethics is, good versus bad, or right versus wrong. I happen to disagree with that. The reason why I disagree with that, because can anyone tell me what's good? That's true. Touche. Right? But how do you define something as good? Good is dependent upon the person that's making that assessment, right? One person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, intellectually speaking, right? So it's all about perspectives. I think that a better definition is acceptable versus not acceptable. right? Acceptable versus not acceptable. Now, the thing about ethics that's even more interesting is that ethics is culture specific. So now we're going to bleed into this diversity thing, right? It's culture specific. Has anyone ever heard of infanticide before? Infanticide. So infanticide, amongst other things, is when a particular culture may decide to end the life of a family member because hunter-gatherers. Sometimes have hunter-gatherer families in third world countries sometimes. So they'll actually take the life of a family member because they know that 5 people is too much, right? Food-wise, right, or resources-wise. Now, from a Western perspective, we kind of recoil when we see that because our ideals a lot of times are antithetical to those ideals, right? But how many things do we do in Western culture that makes other cultures recoil? You guys see where I'm going here? It's all about perspective. Who's making this decision? So it's culture specific. It's also time specific, right? So you'll have, you guys remember reading about the Salem witch trials? Right, now today we read about those things and we think, that's ridiculous, right? You're just gonna say someone's a witch and have no real proof, right? It seems silly today, but that happened, right? Because of the time specifics associated with this issue. I'm always thinking about, too, I talk about this in my book, what kind of things are we doing today, right, that we're gonna look back in 50 years and say, man, what were we doing? What kind of decisions were we making ethically? Right? So ethics is not only culture specific, it's also time specific. In your class, we talked about, was it gender specific? That got interesting, right? I want to talk about how this bleeds in to our perception of each other racially, okay? I was at a conference in Minnesota maybe 6 years ago. And I'm a type A personality, so I'm sitting in the front row, and I'm having this conversation with this gentleman, Caucasian gentleman, had a bow tie on, right? Very conversational, and we're just talking and talking and talking. And I didn't realize that he actually was the person giving the presentation, right? He gets up, he comes to the front of the room, and I'm feeling good because I'm like, hey, I know that guy. Just talking to him, right? He comes up to the front, and he hits a button, and behind him, this wall comes down with this very attractive woman. Right? He starts to explain that he is a statistician, right? And he's also a graphic designer, a really cool combination, right? So he starts to talk about this picture. He says, I took this photograph to inner city urban barbershops, right? And he says, I showed this picture to the guys in the barbershop and I recorded, right, like an ethnography, what they were saying. And the guys in the barbershop said, man, that's a good looking woman. Man, she's really pretty. That's a black woman, right? He wrote down the information, said thank you, and left. He took the same photograph to a Caucasian community, showed the picture. They looked at the picture, and what they said, that's a very attractive woman. She's white. Took the same picture to 4 or 5 other quote-unquote subcultures, right? Other demographics, and it was the same thing. Everyone recognized themselves in this picture. This picture was actually a statistical composite of what they think the average woman is going to look like in the United States in 40 to 50 years. Completely blew me away. Because I started thinking about all the isms. So how do we show maybe racist tendencies to someone that we don't even know what they are? Right? What do? I don't like your group, and I'm not in that group. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. Right? It's gonna be really interesting to see what that does complexity-wise to the ways that we communicate with each other. There's a lot of interesting studies that have been done about race and diversity. For example, there's a study by Bar-Haim, I wanted to talk about this, where they had a test subject of 36 babies. And they showed these babies from different racial backgrounds, photographs, right? And the babies, there were certain babies that preferred black photographs of human beings and certain babies that preferred white photographs. But the only thing that was connecting this is that the babies that saw the black photographs and liked it had grown up in families where what? There were primarily black people around them, right? The same thing with the white photographs. Babies raised in homogeneous cultures had no preference, right? No preference. I want to talk about the fact that race, according to my studies, is more of an idea than a biological fact. It's more of an idea than a biological fact. I'll give you some statistical and by the way, telling people that is like telling them that the world is flat. Right? Because everything we do is based on these racial taxonomies, but we never stop to realize why this is not necessarily the truth. Before I get into those taxonomies, though, I want to talk about the fact that, there's a lot of questions where people are saying, does diversity matter? Right? Is it a good thing? Someone asked me one day, is there such thing as too much diversity? Right? Which is a really interesting question. Diversity does matter. My wife is from a small town in Pennsylvania. And whenever we go to Pennsylvania, I always have a good time, but there's a guy named Mark who is the pastor of a church in that area. And I always like to see Mark. Mark's African American. But one time we saw Mark, and Mark says, "Hey, Bernard, aren't you a professor?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What do you teach?" I said, "Business management courses, things of that nature." And he goes, "Hey, would you come talk to the Chamber of Commerce?" I was like, "Why didn't we talk to the Chamber of Commerce?" And he says, "Well, we're having a problem with diversity in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania." And I was like, "Okay, so what do you want me to talk about?" He starts to give me reams and reams of data, right, supporting the idea that non-diverse towns are non-productive towns. Isn't that something? So they were trying to figure out a way to create more diversity in this town just to keep the town alive, right? Diverse teams tend to be the most productive teams. Why? Because they challenge one another, right? They force each other to think outside of the proverbial box, right? Now, there's a really cool word. I love this word. Not only does it sound cool phonetically, it's a really interesting word. The word is xenophobia. Anyone ever heard of xenophobia? I see you nodding in the back. Xenophobia is the fear of the stranger, right? It's a Greek word. What if the stranger is you? Let that sink in for a minute. What if the stranger is you? Here's what I know about race. I've been doing a ton of research on genetics. And the information I'm finding is blowing my mind. Here's some examples. And I'll tell you the examples and then we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. Number one, human beings share 99% the same DNA. The same. So if you were to put us in a petri dish, a scientist is like, I don't know the difference between anyone in this room. As a matter of fact, scientists can't tell the difference DNA-wise between not just us in this room, but you, and they're hypothesizing that between you and a Cro-Magnon, a cave person, right? Same, as a matter of fact, it's 99.3 or something like that. What's the 1%? If 99% of our DNA is the same, what's the 1% that separates us? In my book, I talk about the fact that I think that the difference is culture. I think it's culture. I think it's the music we listen to, the friends that we have, the places that we go to hang out, the food, right? The language. Culture is what separates us. Now, this 1% is very expansive. I mean, what have we done in the name of culture historically? Have we killed each other in the name of culture? Right? Have we maimed each other in the name of culture? We're constantly harming each other in the name of culture. But if you're a geneticist, this must drive you crazy. Because you know something that the average Joe walking down the street is not thinking about, right? You know that this xenophobia thing is real, that the stranger is us. We are the strangers. We're constantly trying to figure out ways